The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Redemption Springs when the three riders arrived. Margaret Hayes was sweeping the porch of her small boarding house, the same one she'd run alone since her husband Thomas passed 2 winters ago. She paused mid-sweep, watching the strangers tie their horses outside the land office across the way. The tallest one, a man with a silver belt buckle that caught the light, glanced her way. Something in his eyes made her grip the broom tighter. By evening she understood why. The men had come with papers, documents they claimed gave them rights to the water that fed her property and half the farms downstream. Margaret knew those papers were fake. Her Thomas had secured those water rights legally, paid every cent, and filed every form proper. She had the real documents locked in her strongbox. The knock came just after sunset. Margaret opened the door to find all 3 men standing on her porch, the one with the silver buckle. He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "Mrs. Hayes, is it?" he said, removing his hat in a mockery of politeness. "Name's Dalton. We've just purchased the water rights to Silver Creek. I'm here to inform you that you'll need to pay for access now. $50 a month. Those rights aren't for sale," Margaret said firmly. "My husband secured them 5 years ago. I have the documents." Dalton's smile faded. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand the situation. We have papers from the territorial office, signed and legal." "Then your papers are forgeries, Mr. Dalton. I suggest you take your business elsewhere." The second man, shorter and thick-necked, stepped forward. "Now listen here." Dalton held up a hand, silencing him. He leaned closer to Margaret, his voice dropping low. "Mrs. Hayes, you're a woman alone out here. No husband, no help. It would be a shame if something were to happen to your property. Wells can run dry. Fences can fall. Accidents happen to folks who don't have protection." Margaret's face remained calm, though her heart hammered. "Is that a threat, Mr. Dalton?" "Just a statement of facts, ma'am. Friendly advice." He placed his hat back on. "We'll be back tomorrow for your answer. Think carefully." She closed the door and leaned against it, waiting until she heard their boots leave the porch and their horses ride away. Only then did she allow herself to exhale. Margaret lit a lamp and sat at her small writing desk. She pulled out a sheet of paper and began to write. The letter was brief, just 3 sentences, but she knew it would be enough. She sealed it, addressed it to Silver City, and set it by the door to mail first thing in the morning. That night, she barely slept. She kept hearing Thomas's voice in her memory, telling her about the water rights, how important they were, how they'd ensure her future. He'd worked so hard to secure them properly. She wouldn't let thieves steal what he'd built. The next morning, Margaret posted her letter and returned to her boarding house. She had 2 guests at present, an elderly couple passing through on their way to California. She served them breakfast and went about her chores, but her mind was elsewhere. Dalton and his men appeared just after noon. This time they didn't knock. They pushed through the door while she was kneading bread in the kitchen. "Well, Mrs. Hayes?" Dalton said. "Have you reconsidered?" Margaret wiped flour from her hands. "I have not. Those water rights belong to this property, and I have legal documentation. If you have a dispute, take it to the territorial judge." The thick-necked man laughed. "The judge is 3 days' ride from here. A lot can happen in 3 days." "We're being patient with you," Dalton said. "More patient than most would be. But patience has limits. You sign over the rights, we'll pay you a fair price. $100. That's generous for a widow." "Those rights are worth 10 times that, and you know it," Margaret said. "Every farm downstream depends on Silver Creek. Whoever controls the water controls half the county. I won't be part of your scheme." Dalton's face hardened. "Then you're making a serious mistake. We'll be back tomorrow, Mrs. Hayes. And if you haven't come to your senses by then, well." He looked around the tidy kitchen, at the curtains she'd sewn, the dishes Thomas had given her on their anniversary. "Awful nice place you have here. Be a terrible shame." They left, slamming the door behind them. The elderly man, Mr. Patterson, emerged from the back room. Mrs. Hayes, I couldn't help but overhear. Should I fetch the sheriff? The sheriff's office is in Willow Bend, 2 hours away, Margaret said. By the time he arrived, those men would be long gone. Besides, they haven't actually done anything yet. Just threats. Those were serious threats, ma'am. I know, Mr. Patterson, but help is coming. I sent for my brother. Mrs. Patterson appeared beside her husband. You have family. Why nearby? In Silver City. He should receive my letter this afternoon. If I know James, he'll leave immediately. Margaret tried to keep calm the rest of the day, but fear crept in around the edges. What if James didn't get the letter? What if he couldn't come? What if Dalton didn't wait until tomorrow? She was washing dishes after supper when she heard a horse approach. Her heart jumped, but when she looked out, she saw a single rider, not 3. The man dismounted with easy grace, and even in the fading light, she recognized the way he moved. Margaret ran outside. James! Her brother caught her in a hug. He was taller than she remembered, lean and sun-weathered, with calm gray eyes that missed nothing. He wore simple clothes, a dark shirt and worn trousers, and a single revolver on his hip that he carried with the comfort of long familiarity. Got your letter, he said simply. Tell me everything. Over coffee, Margaret explained about Dalton, the forged papers, the threats. James listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. They said they'd be back tomorrow, Margaret finished. I don't know what they'll do, but I'm frightened, James. You did right to call me, he said. Get some rest. I'll keep watch tonight. Do you think they know who you are? James smiled slightly. Doubtful. I've been working claims up in Silver City for 2 years now. Quiet work. I prefer it that way. But Margaret knew her brother's reputation. Before he'd gone to Silver City, before he'd decided he wanted a different life, James McCall had been known throughout 3 territories. Not as a gunfighter or an outlaw, but as something more rare. A man who could draw faster than anyone alive but chose not to unless absolutely necessary. Lawmen had sought his help. Outlaws had learned to avoid him. And those who'd been foolish enough to test him had learned hard lessons without a single death, because James had a gift for shooting weapons out of hands, hats off heads, ninth pride out of bullies. He'd walked away from that life seeking peace. But Margaret knew that the skills remained, and more importantly, the iron will that had made him legendary. Morning came quietly. James made breakfast while Margaret tended to the Pattersons, who checked out early, sensing trouble and wanting no part of it. You don't have to stay, Margaret told her brother. I could go to Willow Bend, file a complaint, and leave your home to these vultures? James shook his head. No, we settle this today. Dalton and his men arrived just before noon, riding up with confidence that bordered on arrogance. They dismounted and started toward the house, but stopped when they saw James standing on the porch. Who's this? Dalton asked Margaret. My brother, James McCall. The name hung in the air. The third man, who'd been silent during the previous visits, went pale. He grabbed Dalton's arm and whispered urgently. Dalton's expression shifted from confidence to uncertainty, to poorly masked fear. James stepped down from the porch, his movements unhurried. Gentlemen, I understand you've been troubling my sister. We have legal business, Dalton said, but his voice had lost its edge. Let's see these papers of yours. Dalton hesitated, then produced a folded document from his jacket. James took it, read it carefully, then handed it back. This is a forgery, he said calmly. The territorial seal is wrong, the signature is misspelled, and the date is impossible, because the clerk listed didn't take office until 6 months after this was supposedly signed. You calling me a liar? Dalton's hand drifted toward his gun. James's eyes went cold. I'm calling you a fraud, a bully, and a coward who threatens women. Now you have a choice. You can ride out of Redemption Springs and never return, or you can make this difficult. The thick-necked man spoke up. There's 3 of us and 1 of you. There is, James agreed. Doesn't seem quite fair. For you. It wasn't a boast. It was a simple statement of fact. delivered with such quiet certainty that all three men felt it in their bones. The third man, the one who'd recognized the name, was already backing toward his horse. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Dalton tried one more time. "We have connections, resources. And I have patience that's running thin," James said. "I've ridden all night to help my sister. I'm tired. I'm not inclined toward long conversations. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to mount those horses. You're going to ride to Willow Bend. You're going to confess your fraud to the sheriff. And you're going to hope he's more merciful than I'm feeling right now. And if we don't?" Dalton's pride made him ask, though his face showed he already knew the answer. James didn't reach for his gun. He didn't need to. "Try me." The silence stretched. Somewhere down the street, a shutter banged in the breeze. A dog barked, and three men came face to face. Ace with their own mortality. The third man broke first, practically running to his horse. "I'm done. This ain't worth it." Thickneck looked at Dalton, waiting for a decision. Dalton stared at James, trying to find some avenue, some play that would let him save face. But James's expression never changed, patient as stone, certain as sunrise. "This isn't over," Dalton finally said. "Yes," James replied. "It is." Dalton turned and walked to his horse, moving with forced dignity. The thick-necked man followed. They mounted and rode out slowly, trying to maintain some shred of pride. But everyone watching knew what had happened. They'd been beaten without a shot fired, without a fist thrown, by nothing more than the presence of a man who didn't need to prove what everyone already knew. Margaret watched them disappear down the road. "You think they'll actually go to the sheriff?" "The smart one will," James said. "The other two might need more convincing. I'll ride to Willow Bend through. This afternoon, have a talk with the sheriff myself. Make sure your documents are properly filed and protected." "Stay for a while?" Margaret asked. "It's been too long." James smiled, and for a moment he looked like the brother she'd grown up with, before the reputation, before the legend. Just James. "I could use a rest, and your coffee's better than anything in Silver City." They went inside, leaving the empty street behind. By evening, word had spread through Redemption Springs. The widow Hayes had a brother. James McCall had returned. And three strangers had learned what the wise already knew. Some battles aren't worth fighting. Some people aren't worth crossing. And reputation, when earned honestly, carries more weight than any forged paper. Margaret never heard from Dalton again. The sheriff in Willow Bend sent word a week later that all three men had left the territory. The water rights remained secure, properly filed and protected, and James stayed for a month, helping repair. The boarding house, fixing the fence, doing all the tasks that Thomas would have done. When he finally prepared to leave, Margaret walked him to his horse. "Thank you doesn't seem like enough." "Your family," James said simply. "That's always enough. Will you come back?" "When you need me." He swung into the saddle. "But I think you'll be fine, Margaret. You stood up to them before I even arrived. You're stronger than you know." She watched him ride toward Silver City, back to his quiet life, away from the reputation that followed him. She understood why he'd left it behind. There was no glory in being the fastest gun alive, just burden and expectation and endless tests from fools trying to make names for themselves. But she also understood that some men carried their strength like James did, quiet and sure, using it only when necessary, preferring peace but prepared for anything. Those were the truly dangerous men, the ones who didn't need to prove anything because they'd already proven everything. Margaret returned to her boarding house, to her life, to the water that flowed clear and free through Silver Creek. And though she hoped she'd never need to send another letter, never face another threat, she slept soundly knowing that somewhere in Silver City, her brother would always come if she called. Some protections, she'd learned, weren't about guns or violence. They were about family, loyalty, and the quiet certainty that you never stood alone. That was worth more than all the water rights in the territory. That was everything.